and you say, I've got my, this is if you're working with buyers. Let's assume everybody's got a buyer you're writing a contract for, an offer. You say, well, I don't know the legal name of the seller. How am I going to find that out? Anybody want to tell me? Jill?
Tax records.
The tax records. You go to the tax records to get the name of the seller. Because most of the time the MLS is not going to have the name of the seller in there. Agents just don't do that anymore. So go to the tax record, get the name of the seller, put it in there. What this keeps from happening is if you don't do that, you send it to the other agent and it's blank. Then they've got to put it in, and then everybody's got an initial. So go ahead and pull up the tax records and get the correct name to start with. These next definitions, I want you all to read them. I'm not going to read through every one of them. Pretty simple about party and brokers, closing attorney. The effective date. That is the date that the contract is ratified. And what do I mean by ratified? It is the date, the final date for the final initial that has been put on the contract if there are changes. So it is critical that when you make changes in a contract, you initial and date every change. The date is very, very important. I can't stress that enough. If you don't put a date, I've had potential lawsuit situations where the date would have made a difference on the initials, and the person didn't date the initials. So always date your initials. But the effective date, and everything in this contract, a lot of things refer back to your effective date, and that is the date that the contract is ratified. The business date, we're going to read this business date because this is probably the most important thing in this contract. It's a 24-hour period, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, beginning at 10 a.m. and counted from 10 a.m. of the first business day following the appropriate date, whether it's the effective date, the closing date, stated date, notice of delivery date. So it is, excuse me, going back, following the appropriate date, it is counted with business days shall not begin in or include any Saturday, Sunday, or federal legal holiday. And this is where people get in trouble with business days. You forget the way it's supposed to be counted. If you ratify a contract today, anytime today, before 12 midnight tonight, then the business days you begin counting starting tomorrow, because it says the following day after the effective date or whatever. So you start tomorrow. Is tomorrow day one?
Yes.
No. It's the beginning. So this is Tuesday. So if we ratify it today, we start on Wednesday at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Thursday is one day.
24 hours.
Okay? So you start counting the day after, but that's not day one. Okay. So if you ratify it today, come on in, Jamie. You can sit over here. If you ratify it today, then, and you say you've got 2 business days in the contract that you got to deal with. One of those 2 days up. You ratify today, that is Tuesday. So you start tomorrow,
Friday
Thursday. Thursday's 1, Friday is 2. But it's at 10 a.m. And this gets people in trouble too, because most real estate agents assume it's 5 p.m. because that is the way it used to be. It is not. It is the contract definition right here says 10 a.m. So it ends at 10 a.m. on that day that it ends. Y'all all got that?
I'm confused about the one day one. Yeah, day one.
Day one is like, if you ratify it today, tomorrow's Wednesday, you begin counting tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Yep.
And then Thursday at 10 a.m. would be one day.
Oh,
and then Friday would be 2 days at 10 a.m.
Friday at
10 a.m.
And that would be 2 days.
Now, if it said 3 business days, when is your 3 business days up?
Monday. 10 a.m.
Monday.
Not
At 10 a.m. Because
it's Memorial Day.
except this particular Monday, good going, Jill. This particular Monday is Memorial Day, so 3 business days would be up Tuesday, but you don't count Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday. And the fines and time, we'll let you all do that on your own. Pretty much everything in this contract, time is of the essence, applies to. I will define time is of the essence for you, in case you're not aware of what that is. But time is of essence means that when that date comes and goes, it's over. It's done. If it says time is of the essence, if the closing date is time is of the essence, unless it says on or before, which in our case it does say on or before, but just say you're going to have an inspection done by, say, May the 23rd. Then when May 23rd comes and it's over and you haven't had that inspection done, you can't get it anymore. Time is of the essence, meaning it's over. You've missed that opportunity. Yes, Jason.
Back to business day. Is a business day then 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. or is a business day from the whole 8 a.m. to whatever?
10 a.m. to 10 a.m.
So if you sign a contract at 8 a.m.
That's a great question. If you sign a contract this morning at 8 a.m., it still starts the following day.
So it's a business day.
It starts tomorrow at 10. Okay. So Thursday, and that's a good question because we've had some actually brokers that thought this was 10 a.m. that you started at 10. I mean, at 8 a.m. that you start at 10, but you don't because it says the following business day. Okay. So I don't care what time of day today you ratify it. Your business days begin tomorrow, but they only begin tomorrow. It's not the first day. And the next little section is buyer or seller as a South Carolina real estate licensee. That is only if the buyer or seller is a licensee. And they have to check that box. And if any of you all are buying or selling, you better check the box. The purchase price. This is another thing. I review, I can't say every contract, because this past week with Linda being out, I did not review any contract. But I review most of the contracts that come into the office, and I will highlight in green or blue or pink or something the suggested changes that you should have done. I could have done to make it a better contract and get it back to you. You've obviously turned it in as a ratified contract, so I don't mean for you to go change it. It's just when you write the next contract, you'll know not to make those same mistakes. And just hope and pray that it all goes through. Remember, my favorite saying in the world is nothing's a problem until it's a problem. So a lot of times these bad contracts, you get by with it and nothing ever happens. But if it becomes a problem, it can be a bad problem, a severe problem. On the purchase price, please put the number in. Almost everybody puts the number in. If it's $350,000, you write in there. Then you write the words out. The majority of real estate agents do not continue and write the words out. Why in the world would we want the words written?
Words mean more in the legal world, too.
Yeah, words are legal.
Words mean more, maybe, but also to keep from mistakes, typos. And you say, well, I'm handwriting mine. Hopefully you'll use zip forms and you won't be handwriting. But you can easily make a mistake when you type in the contract. So you need the numbers and the words. And I'll tell you on zip forms, a little trick, as I understand it, when you're typing on zip forms, you put the number in, everybody says, oh, but it won't take the words. You have to put a space, and then it'll take the words. Yeah. You hit the space bar, it'll take the words after that. But nobody in zip forms tells you that. Yeah. Yes?
Okay, so let's say we're not the buyer, but we are the listing agent, and we get this contract, and the words are not written out. At that point, should we write the words out, or just let it go?
If the question is, if you get a contract from somebody else and it's no listing, and they have not written the words out, if there's no change on that contract, no, do not write the words. But if you've got to counter it anyway, then yes, write the words out.
Okay. But we're not countering price, we're just, okay, good enough.
Yeah. Just any change in the contract, they're going to have initials somewhere.
Yes.
So then I would go write it out. But I wouldn't, if you don't have to make any changes, then definitely don't do that. Write it.
Okay.
Because the buyer might walk.
Okay.
Over something so silly.
Okay.
Payable by transfer of good funds via finance or combination of finance and cash or cash. That's pretty simple. If they're going to get a loan, then you check which one.
Finance. The middle, because you almost always have to put cash.
Typically, it's a combination of cash and finance. Because typically, somebody's putting some money down. Now, if somebody's getting a 100% loan, then it would just be finance. But that's rare. We don't have that many VA loans coming through, but we have some that are 100%. And we've had a lot of cash few months, the last year.
Question on that, even if they're 100% VA, typically they put down earnest money. So would that count as part of the cash that's credited to the transaction?
No, because it'll just go toward closing costs or something. The question is, if you have earnest money, even though they're getting 100% loan, if you're getting 100% loan, then it's still finance. Because that earnest money is just applied to the money they bring to closing. And they probably have closing costs of some sort. If not, they just get the money back. They pay back earnest money. The next one, this is very important. If your buyer has a property to sell, the buyer's real property is or is not contingent on the purchase, and the terms are or are not attached. If your buyer has another property to sell, the state has a form for that. There is a form, an addendum for the sale of another property, and you already use that form. And you are to say, yes, it is, and the things are attached, if that is the case. Property. The next one, you got to fill this out, and I'll say this now. A lot of times in our legal description, maybe this, like for this has the example, address, and it says unit number. If it's a regular residential house, you're not going to have a unit number, more than likely. What do you put in that spot? NA. Every blank on the contract should have something in it. And going back to Jill's question a while ago, was it something plugged in over there? I gave it to Ralph downstairs in the conference room. Every blank on the contract, and that's going back to Jill's question, if you get a contract on a listing of yours, and they don't have NAs in these blanks, and there's no changes, don't go doing that. Just leave it alone. But the correct, perfect contract would have NA in all the blanks that don't apply.
Should you mention to the application?
I wouldn't bother. I mean, why teach them? No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't bother unless you got to make some changes on the contract. Then you go on down to the tax map. Of course, y'all know where you get the tax map number, right? If it's not an MLS, but it is an MLS, but I would check with the tax record to see if it was a typo in the MLS, which that happens a good bit too. See if they match. The next section, this is a huge debate among mortgage brokers and real estate people. Parties agree that no personal property will transfer as part of this sale except described below or in attachments. If there are things like a washer, dryer, or refrigerator, no mortgage company has a problem with that. Just put it in there. Washer, dryer, refrigerator, then put it on those lines. If it is furniture or a boat or outside patio furniture or big fancy grill or something like that.
Piano. A piano.
A piano.
That won't fit back out the door.
Yeah, exactly. You need to put it on here. But the mortgage person is going to tell you not to, because they do not want it included in the appraisal. And they'll say, oh, y'all just figured that out outside of closing. Never, ever listen to a loan officer who tells you that, because you could get in trouble, you could commit mortgage fraud. If the lender is not going to allow it, then it can't be done. But you'll have loan officers all over, not reps, but loan officers everywhere telling you to do that. And a lot of agents innocently would do that, get caught up in it.
One time I had I had to cross it off and move everything over to a bill of sale. That's what the lender asked me to do, so is that all right?
Yes and no. Question is, using a bill of sale, all right. You have to address the bill of sale right here. See bill of sale. And then the bill of sale, which is a good way to do it,
Right.
but the bill of sale must be for the value of what you're transferring.
Right.
So if you're doing a piano, you're not doing it for $5.
You can't say at no cost.
No, because there's a cost, there's a value to those documents. And this is what the mortgage people don't want. They don't want that to be included in their appraisal.
If it's going to complicate their financing, but if everybody has the money's not an issue, then that's the proper way to do it. There shouldn't be a problem, right? It's just those people that are right on the edge that typically is the problem, correct?
Well, typically people are putting 5% or 10% down.
Right.
If you've got somebody that's putting 50% down, then no, nothing's a problem. But if you get a typical loan that's going through, it's going to be a
They're right on
problem.
the edge.
It's going to be a problem. And I see people all the time do a bill of sale for $1, you know, but I'm telling you, nothing's a problem until it's a problem.
Oh, and mirrors are often a big problem.
Mirrors.
They'll assume that they're gonna stay with the house and people take them.
Yeah.
Lisa's right, mirrors are, if you are, when you're looking at a house, you gotta make sure that the bathroom mirrors are attached or not attached. A lot of bathroom mirrors are just hanging there like a photo, a picture. And those will go with the buyer, the homeowner, unless you put in the contract that the mirrors will stay.
Got it.
Yeah. So the big argument here, and I've talked to Dan and to Roxanne about what is the solution for this. And really, nobody's ever come up with a good solution. Nobody. Because the mortgage people do not want it in there because it affects the appraised value. So they don't want it in there. They want it done outside of closing. You do something outside of closing, then if the mortgage company doesn't know about it, as long as you don't know about it, that's not a problem for you. But chances are you're going to know about it.
Yeah.
And if you know about it, then you know. And if you ever get in court and you have to swear on the oath, then you could be in trouble. I'm not saying you will be, but you could be. I'm just saying, whatever the true fact is, put it in the contract.
If you put it on the bill of sale, then you're asking the realtor then to appraise, to assign the value of the piano. I wouldn't know what the value to assign to a piano.
No, well, what this really comes into a real problem is really your beach property, where you sell these houses that are completely furnished. And that is a real problem, because sometimes the people just want to unload the house, and they just say the furniture goes with it. Well, the appraiser will figure out what that value of the furniture is, and therefore it's subtracted from the value of the house. So that's where the issues come into play. So if you put a bill of sale for the furniture, then you need to come up with a value for the furniture. And you and the seller can come up with a value that's a realistic value, not $1. Okay, conveyance, closing and possession. This is really when your closing is going to take place. And you must have a specific date. Don't put in here in the contract closing within 2 weeks after so-and-so happens. It needs to be a specific date. And you say, well, they got a house to sell. How do I know when that's going to happen? You pick a date out there. 90 days from now, 120 days from now. Pick a date and put that in there because it says owner before. So you have to have a specific date. And then it goes, it says with an automatic extension of blank business days. Typically 10 is all you need to put in there. 10 business days will, I don't see why you'd ever need more. Now, there are a lot of experienced real estate professionals in this marketplace that feel that this is an automatic extension of a closing date. If it just can't make the closing date, oh, don't worry, I got 10 days in here to extend it. It is only good for unsatisfied contingency through no fault of either party. It's got to be the fault of the closing attorney or the fault of the lender. If the buyer didn't get their repairs done, their inspection done, or get their loan application stuff in on time and all that, it does not apply here. If the seller did not get the repairs done in time, that does not apply here, because it's the seller's fault, or it's the buyer's fault. It's only if, this only comes into play if it is not the buyer or seller's fault that the closing could not take place.
Would the contract be void if it went past that?
I have
Voidable.
voidable. So
Voidable.
if
Obvious.
both parties are happy, okay, and something was, let's say, supposed to close on the 12th, there was 5 days, it's past that.
Financing just dragging on or something.
Well,
No
no title,
title,
then
no
that comes into
title.
play.
They
It's
can't-
10 days come into play.
Right, but the 10 days are over and there's no title.
You need to do an addendum to the contract to extend
And
the
then
closing date.
one,
Just
an
a general
addendum.
addendum. Just to
To make sure
extend the
it has
closing date.
okay.
Okay.
Because you don't want to leave the contract
Yeah.
voidable.
And the listing agent can do that. It doesn't have to be the person who
Either
originally
agent
wrote the
can do
contract.
it.
Okay,
Either agent.
thank you. And I'll put that.
The next page, at the top of the page, this is where you want to put the name of the title it's going to be taken in. So if you have Joe and Susie Smith, more than likely the title is going to be in Joseph R. and Susan. It needs to be whatever name the title is going to be in. we have some situations, we recently had one where the wife could not be here at the, they wanted to make an offer on something, but the wife could not be here, the wife had to go on a trip. The husband is gonna really be the only one on the financing anyway. So we said, you just put the contract in the husband's name, but here, you put both names, because it will be deeded to the wife and the husband. You say no?
I say definitely no, I've already had that gone through and had it bounced back up with Rexham. We had to rewrite the contract
Well, that's
without the wife's name.
Well, that's because
She wasn't,
if she needs to be involved in the loan, then.
no, we didn't want her involved in the loan because her credit is crap.
Well, I'm sorry, I've never heard of that. I'll have to talk to Rex. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, the mortgage is one thing, the house is another.
The deed, the title is
Right.
one, yeah.
It was a foreclosure, the bank wouldn't let it go.
Okay, that's
Not,
different.
you're right, not Rex's bank.
Right, it's a foreclosure. That,
Foreclosure
okay.
thing.
That's
Sorry.
a different animal, right?
Okay.
And you can always add somebody to the deed afterwards too, if needed to.
You can always add somebody to the deed afterwards, it's supposed to pay an attorney fee for that,
Right.
so.
Okay.
Okay, moving on down to the earnest money. This confuses people for some reason. The earnest money, the total earnest money, it's whatever it is, if it's $1,000, $5,000, and people ask me a lot, what do you recommend for earnest money, different dollar volumes, sales price? I always say, I don't care what the sales price is, my opinion is, don't go over $7,000. Why? Because that is the maximum of $7,500, I think is the maximum of small claims court. And so if there's a dispute over it, you'd much rather go to small claims court, get it settled in a reasonable length of time, than having to go to the real courts, that it takes years.
And that's 7,500, you said?
75?
I think it's I say 7,000, but I believe small claims court is 75, but don't hold me to that. I just put 7,000, I know that's safe. Now, you put 7,000 in that first block. Now, how is that 7,000 going to be paid is of the next blocks? Are you going to pay it with this offer? If it goes with this offer, then you put 7,000 there. If it is not going with this offer, you put NA in that spot. And then you put the 7,000 in the next spot, if you put NA in the first one. And it would be paid within blank business days. 2 business days, 3 business days is normally what I see. It just gives people time to get back and transfer the funds. It's basically what it's for. Somebody's from out of town and they gotta go back and transfer. Now, I'll caution you on that too. If you do that, you gotta make sure you get that money. Especially if it's your listing and somebody else wrote the contract and the other company's supposed to be keeping the earnest money. You need to follow up and make sure that earnest money comes in when it's supposed to. Let me say this right now, I'm thinking about it. Earnest money is not required to have a ratified contract. A lot of people think it is. In South Carolina, it is not required to have a ratified contract. However, if you put in here that $7,000 accompanies this offer, and it doesn't, you can still ratify the contract, and it's considered ratified, but your buyer is in default immediately on the contract. So, the default, what does default mean? And we'll talk about that a little bit further, but basically, the seller can terminate the contract just like that.
Well, wait a second here, I'm confused on that. Because they submitted the earnest money with the,
Because it says that earnest money's gonna come with the contract, but it doesn't really.
you did not turn it.
We have that going on right now, actually, while Lee London was out of town on vacation. He didn't know he was supposed to get somebody to cover for him, so guess who got to cover for him? So, we did a contract on one of his listings, and the contract he had written before he left town, and it said $1,000 earnest money accompanies this offer. Well, we ratified the contract, and I'm talking, I said, where is the $1,000? I haven't seen that. Oh, we haven't given that to you yet. I said, oh, but it says it's with the offer. Well, we're gonna put it in the mail. I said, I was talking last night, you do realize that you are in default of the contract. Yes, we have a ratified contract, but you're already in default. So if the seller gets a better offer, he'll terminate this contract just like that. Now you make sure your people understand what's going on. Yeah.
Okay, then as soon as the $1,000 get there, can they default at that point?
No.
So once, okay.
Once the earnest money comes in, then we get it, then we have it. Okay.
Just don't check your mail.
How many days?
And going on down, the next block on this, on the earnest money, oh, excuse me, then you have to say who's gonna hold the earnest money, whether it's AgentOwned Realty or Carolina, Eloise, whoever. Then the next block down there, that block, put $100 in it. Always $100 goes in there. That's what goes there. Why? Because this is money that in the event that we have to go to a small claims court, and in the event the brokerage has to do what we call interpleader action, whereas the brokerage has to sue the buyer and seller. I don't like that, but that's the way it is. In order to settle the dispute of the earnest money. This gives us the right to take $100 of the earnest money and pay it, because it's $90 or $95 to file with small claims. That's the purpose of it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to put $200, you don't need to put, please don't put 50, put $100. That works every time. Okay, going on down to transaction costs, I want you to read, I'm not going to read all this verbiage, you guys need to read it on your own, but the next blank, especially you really newbies, y'all really need to read the words. I want you to have read everything in it. But the next blank is really just an NA blank. I see all kinds of things written there, but I'm really not sure why they put it there to start with, and Byron King in Columbia doesn't know why either. But people write things about closing costs and things like that in there, but you either put NA or put the word CSEE below. See below, because the paragraph below talks about the closing costs. And the next one, a lot of people forget this. When I review the contracts, probably the most overlooked thing in the contract is this next two sentences.
Mm-hmm.
The private or public transfer fees and any cost similar to transfer fees, all these things named with similar fees paid to the homeowners association are either the seller or the buyer's transaction costs. You have to check one or the other. You know, don't leave it up to somebody to make up your mind of the buyers. So it's either going to be the seller or the buyer's transaction costs. If you're working with a buyer, it's typically the sellers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're working with the seller, it's typically the buyers. And the next paragraph is so wonderful that for those who've been around a while, that we have in this new contract, that the verbiage is there. If you want the seller to pay some of the closing costs with the buyer, you don't have to come up with the verbiage on your own. It is here. And you put the dollar amount, or you can put a percent. Be careful when you're doing this, especially if you're new, you got to make sure that if you're selling a $100,000 house, you can't say that if you say the seller's going to pay $10,000 in closing costs. Well, the closing costs may not be $10,000, or it may not be allowed. It might be $10,000, but the particular type of loan that they're getting would not allow the seller to contribute that much. So you need to sort of work, if you ask them to pay closing costs, kind of work with your loan officer to get that straight. It does say in this paragraph that any excess funds will revert back to the seller if the seller's paying X dollars. So that part is covered in the paragraph in the printed material. 7, the finance clause. This new contract, I'm very disappointed they went back to the old stuff, which I don't like, but at any rate, the contract either is or is not contingent on obtaining financing. That's pretty simple. Either it is or it isn't. If they're paying cash, it's not. If they're not paying cash, it is. And then you go on to whether it's a 30-year or 15-year or other purchase money loan. What in the world would other be? It's not a 30-year, not a 15-year. It could be an ARM, a 5-year ARM. Could be something like that. If you know that up front, most of the time you don't know if they're going to go with an ARM, but that is what it's talking about. And then going on down to an amount equal to a minimum percent of the purchase price or appraised value. Experienced agents hate this. They hate this. And they yell and scream about it. The old contract used to say a minimum percentage and a maximum percentage. This contract says minimum. The state committee that wrote the contract, the purpose of it, they say that it is understood, assumed and understood that the maximum is 100%. That is what their thought process was when they wrote this. So if they're getting an 80% loan to value, you put 80% here. If they're getting a 90% loan to value, you put 90%. Whatever it is. And then going on down to the last sentence there, they shall apply for the financing within blank business days. from the effective date. So we have effective date and business date. Typically, when you write an offer, the people, a lot of times, already been qualified, already done a loan out. So you can put 2 days, 1 day, whatever. 5 days is typically what I suggest putting in there. And if they've already done it, fine. They've done it within the 5 days. If they're local, there's no need for 5 business days, really. But
A quickie, that's one more quickie question.
mhm.
Okay, on the financing, let's say they started with the 30-year and then decided, hey, that's a great rate on the 7-year ARM. Do you have to do
No.
initial, you just move forward?
Leave it alone, move forward.
Okay.
The question was, if they start with a 30-year and then switch it to an ARM, do we have to make changes in initials or addendum? But no.
Okay, good.
The next page, it says, this, shall provide the seller with reasonable, satisfactory written loan approval that contains no credit, income, or asset conditions within blank business days from the effective date. I'm here to tell you guys, just ain't, excuse my English, gonna happen. You're not gonna get a written loan approval. Now, until closing. That's how the mortgage rule works. At the closing table, you know you got approval. Now, we do have, it does say in here, reasonable, satisfactory. Satisfactory to whom? You know, what's satisfactory to me may not be satisfactory to Jason, or, you know, it's a little bit strange. So I say, I put 20, it doesn't matter what you put in there.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter, because it's not gonna happen.
Okay.
So,
20 days?
20 days is fine. 20, 25 days. If you got a closing in 120 days, then I would put 20 days. You know, I'd go out there. If your closing is way out. But typically closings are in 30 to 45 days after you write an offer. And then the next blank is when you put the name of the lender. Prosperity Home Mortgage goes there every time. Isn't that right, Jamie?
That's right.
And then you're going to mark whether it is FHA or VA, or conventional, or seller, or other. Typically, most of our loans are conventional. We have FHA some, a few, but FHA loans are really not very desirable anymore. They're terrible because the insurance is on for life now. Used to be for a few years, now it's for life. So FHA loans are not good. Besides, Prosperity has 97% conventional money. So why do you need FHA? Prosperity also has a loan that Linda paid insurance for the mortgage insurance there. They've got some great loans. And then you say that if it's an FHA or VA, you must have the FHA VA addendum, and you want to mark that it's attached. I didn't bring one of those up here, but we have them, and they're on zip forms. And then additional financing terms are or are not attached, and typically it would be are not attached. Now, next thing, the repair procedure. In my opinion, if you represent a buyer, you will not ever use the repair procedure. That's just my opinion. You will use the due diligence. The repair, you're going to get contracts on your listings, though, from other people. And this is what blows my mind. I see these when I review these contracts, when they come on our listings. There's a repair procedure, they've got the dates and stuff in there, and they have the due diligence addendum. Guys, it's one or the other. You can't have both. And then I see contracts that say the repair procedure, but then the agent writes in the special stipulation section, they write in that the home inspection to be the total satisfaction of the buyer. Hello? That's due diligence, really. And you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be writing in the contract. That's what this new contract form is all about. The state came up with this form that has everything in it you need. You're not supposed to be writing words. Coming from North Carolina, I'll tell you, South Carolina is, of course, an attorney state, and they are accusing realtors of practicing law about when you start writing in the contract. So be careful with that. And that's one reason this contract exists today. It's because I was doing it too. I had written a 4-page addendum. So I don't do that anymore. Not anymore.
What did you say at the very beginning? You said that if you're representing blank, you use the buyer, you use the repair procedure?
No,
No,
Don't
use
use
due diligence.
All right, okay.
Yeah, if you represent the buyer, you want to use due diligence. And I'll tell you why. This repair procedure, if you use it, let's just say that you're buying an older house, an old Mount Pleasant. Your buyers are. And they do the inspection, and the seller says, "I'll fix everything." And the buyer says, "Oh, I am worried." I mean, there were major problems with the house. The buyer doesn't want the house. But if you use this section, and the seller's willing to fix it, your buyer has to buy it. But if you use due diligence, no, they can get out. That's why I say if you're representing the buyer, always use due diligence. Because you want to do what's best for your buyer. I had one agent tell me, "I don't want to do that, I want them to close." We all want them to close, but we don't want a buyer to close on something they don't want. Because you'll never get any business from them in the future, you won't get any referrals from them or anything. You just don't want that. So if you represent the buyer, yes.
By the same token, if you're representing a seller, let's say the seller get two contracts in.
Go
One
repair
has got a
procedure.
repair procedure, one has got due diligence.
Use repair procedure. If you represent the seller, as Rudy was saying, and you got multiple contracts coming in, and you're trying to decide, one is using due diligence addendum, and one is using the repair procedure. I'd pick the repair procedure if I could represent the seller. Because if the seller says, "I want to fix the stuff," then they gotta buy it.
Well, assuming all other elements are
Yeah.
satisfied.
Right. Assuming everything else is equal, right? Yeah, because that might be a much better price and stuff. But if everything else is equal, that's what you want to do. But if you represent the buyer, use due diligence. There are a lot of things that need to be considered when a buyer is buying a house, in addition to the inspection and the repairs. So you want to use the due diligence.
The buyer can walk if he doesn't like anything about the
And
situation.
pull up the due diligence addendum that I had there. Let's look at it real quick. On the due diligence addendum, at the top, you're simply going to fill in the address of the property and all that good stuff. And then it says the due diligence period ends no later than blank business days after the original effective date, unless they agree in writing to extend the due diligence period. So whatever you put in here is your business days, and then we already talked about how you calculate it. But in today's market, we are finding that the home inspectors are really busy because the market's good, a lot of sales going on. And so you may need a little longer due diligence period because that home inspection will be a part of your due diligence. But, so 20 business days sounds like a lot when you talk about business days, but if it takes you over 5 to 8, 9 business days to get the home inspectors out to the property, 20 business days is not too much. In our normal market, then probably 10, 15 business days is enough.
If you put down 20, but it ends up taking 25, is it just a normal addendum that you would then?
Yes, do a normal addendum to extend that, right. And this other little section in there coming up, forget that. People get confused and say, "Oh, this only applies to these things." No. It applies to anything the buyer has concern about. And I would suggest to your buyers that they ride the neighborhood, they find out if it's the neighborhood they want to live in, they check the schools out, all of this during due diligence period. If they want to put a swimming pool in, and there's not one there, and they want to put one in, they got to get checked out and make sure they can do that during the due diligence period. Anything the buyer's interested in for that house, except, it's an exception to everything in it. Finance, appraisal, and CL 100 letter.
Okay.
Those 3 things do not come within the due diligence period in this contract, by definition. So, a lot of agents now, the experienced agents, want the CL 100 to come within the due diligence period. Because when we get to that paragraph, the same thing applies there. The CL 100 letter is done, and if the seller is willing to fix those things, the buyer has to buy it. But in an older house, maybe there's a lot of termite damage and stuff, maybe the buyer doesn't want to buy it. So if you want to include it in the due diligence, that may cost you 2 termite letter costs of 2, because they're only good for 30 days. For those, maybe y'all didn't know that, but it's still a good idea, and a lot of agents saying, I'll just pay for the second letter. Because we want to know what the situation is on the CL 100 during our due diligence period. Yes.
Are any of these things outlined anywhere that they should recommend they do their due diligence on? Because, you know, you can have a ton of things to do due diligence on, from flight paths to electrical lines
Of
to
course.
how many alligators are in the pond, you know, so.
Uh,
That can
so-
last forever if you.
I have that blue sheet, and I didn't bring one upstairs, but I have a blue sheet in the kitchen area that, it's for you, once you get a ratified contract, you go in and plug in the dates on there, and at the bottom of that, there are some suggestions of things that might be in the due diligence period for dates that you have them done by, and this is strictly for your internal use. But that's the only thing where, I mean, there's so much, it couldn't possibly cover it all.
Right.
That could be covered in due diligence. That's why I said, anything your buyer has mentioned to you, when you're showing property or walking around, square footage of the house. Most listings do not have correct square footage, because they get it from the air, or they get it from the tax records, which is not accurate. They get it from a former appraisal, but that should be accurate, but a lot of times it isn't necessarily. So, but if you have a buyer that is concerned about square footage, and they start talking about it when you're showing the property, you better get out and take measure and measure the house. And when you do that, I would have the buyer hold in, it has the numbers on it. So they tell me the number.
Right.
Just a little help from it. Okay, the next spot on here is the termination fee. What goes in the termination fee? If you're representing the buyer, 0. And zip form sometimes does not want to take to 0, so you have to spell the word out.
Or just space.
Oh, space in it. So, if you're representing the seller, and a buyer brings you a contract, agent brings you a contract on your listing, and they've got 25 or 30 business days in there, then you're going to recommend to your seller that you get some money for that. They're going to be keeping that house off the market for 25 or 30 days. They should be compensated for it, if you're representing the seller. But if you're representing the buyer, you're going to put 0 when you put it in there, and leave it up to the seller to put some amount in if they want to. And what I'm seeing is most sellers don't do anything, they just leave it alone with the 0. I have a few that come in that are written by, for some little reason, I guess at Century 21, I guess they teach the agents to put $200. All the Century 21 contracts have $200 in there. Let me tell you the story. Key Watley, some of y'all know Key and some don't. She's an agent here. She wrote a contract on a big property on Sutherland Island, and she put $1 in there. Well, they terminated the contract. They owed $1 to the seller. Well, the problem was, do we write a company check for $1? That's what we should have done, because when you have a record, it comes out of earnest money, $1 goes. Well, she just gave them $1. And I said, well, you gotta have some proof that they got that $1. Don't put $1 down there, just put 0. She was thinking she was doing the right thing by just putting $1.
What blank were you referring to here?
Right here in the due diligence.
Oh,
On the due diligence, we're talking about the due diligence.
I thought we talked about doing like $100 or something.
No, that's for the earnest money. The due diligence is 0 if you represent the buyer. That's why I said make these little cheat sheets as we go along, because it's impossible to remember all this stuff, and I understand that. Jamie and Jill, Randy have advantages nearing June too, because they've written many contracts, but
And what was the number you recommended for that?
0
Yeah.
if you're representing the buyer.
Oh,
If you get one on your listing, then you want to put some amount in there, depending on how long they want to keep the house off the market. If they just do 10 or 15 days, no big deal. Okay, y'all all got that, the difference in the due diligence and the repair? So what is outside of due diligence? Financing, CL 100, and appraisal.
What's
Those
the
3 things.
100?
Termite letter, better known as a termite letter. So, but I just said also about the CL 100 or the termite letter that you can map it into the due diligence. Your buyer or you or somebody may have to pay for a second letter, because the CL 100s are only good for 30 days.
The buyers are getting where they want to do the CL 100.
A lot of times, we'll talk about that when we get to there in just a minute. All right, so, and that, going on down right above number 9, you'll say, it says there, if a due diligence addendum is signed, dated in time by all parties, the parties agree that the language in the due diligence addendum shall replace the repair procedure language. Duh. So it's either one or the other, not both.
So we don't have to, do we X out this, or what do we do with those?
Put NA in those blanks.
Just in the blank?
Just put NA, and that's fine. Now,
Okay.
Stan X's it all out on zip forms, and that's great. It's not a problem with that, of course.
Okay.
But you can X it out, you can put a big X through it and have an initial on the side, or you just stick NA in there from the beginning. That works as well. And while we're saying that, on zip forms plus, at the top, there's a little box that you can check. It says NA, and when you finish writing the contract, and you check that box, it fills in all the blanks with NA.
Oh, I didn't know
Oh,
that.
wow. Really cool too.
Save me.
All right, number 9, inspection rights. This goes on, and this talks about this includes your walkthrough before the closing, and whatever you do, don't ever sell a house where you don't do a walkthrough before closing. You always do a walkthrough before closing, always, and preferably the day before. But a lot of times the people are not out of the house, so you don't do it until they are out of the house, because when they move out, things happen. And you find things underneath where the carpet was that you didn't know was there before, and things like that. Holes in the floor, all kind of interesting things. So you don't want to do a walkthrough until the people have moved out. And if you do it too close to closing, then you could have an issue because there's something wrong and it could mess the closing up if you didn't get it fixed in time. So you try to do it earlier, but it's not always possible. When seller grants permission to connect utilities, it already says that the seller agrees to keep the utilities on. So you don't have to check anything here. You just put NA in the other box. But almost everybody checks the seller grants buyer permission.
Okay, is there a way we can write in there that the seller will have these things connected up so the buyer doesn't have to?
It says the seller will make, unless otherwise, seller will keep all utilities operational through closing. That's in the printed material of the contract. So that's why I said you don't need to check anything
Oh,
else.
okay.
Yeah.
But if they're already on, to check other, and then.
If it's already off, then you know it's off, and yeah.
And then we could say the other seller is required to turn them on.
Yeah, she's saying if the utilities are already off, on the other, you could just check that box and say seller to have the utilities turned on, if you want the seller to do it.
Until closing.
I'm sorry?
Until closing.
Yes,
So-
for the inspections.
Yeah.
And you need the utilities on for the walkthrough, guys.
Uh-huh.
We had an agent that went to a walkthrough about an hour before closing, the utilities were not on. So they couldn't have the closing, they had to postpone the closing, because they couldn't turn any lights on or anything. And it was an experienced agent, and she said she just never had that happen before, and never thought about it. So you gotta make sure that utilities are on when you do your walkthrough.
You walk through place, like, before vehicles or whatever, you could, and then come back later, after that out and check them again.
You
Or
could,
check other things, you know.
you do that. You could do the Mary's saying you do the walkthrough before they move out, like the day before, and then find any major things, and then go back and check it real quickly after they've moved out. You could certainly do that. Might be a little less time consuming that way. Okay, the appraised value, number 10. It either is contingent upon appraisal or not. So you check either the top box or the next, and most 99% of the time it is going to be contingent upon an appraisal. You always want to suggest that your buyer get an appraisal, even if they pay cash. You do not take that responsibility on yourself to feel like you know what the value is of the property. You should never do that, because you don't really know. You need a professional to do that. The wood infestation report. This is the CL 100 and the termite letter, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of people, as June said, are now saying the buyer will have the property inspected at their expense. It's somebody selected by the buyer. Now, some people are saying the seller will pay for it and the buyer select them. But when we had the Clemson guy in here that works for the CL, regulates the inspectors of CL 100, he said that he thinks it's better to have the seller do it. A lot of times the seller has a termite bond on the property and that can get transferred. And personally, I don't care if they have a termite bond on the property. It may not be the type that your buyer wants, and sometimes that makes it easier for them to go in and just say everything's okay, when it really isn't. You agree with me?
Yes, ma'am. I would recommend my clients get their own inspection.
I
Get
think-
their people to.
Personally, I recommend that the buyer, and if you want to get the seller to pay for it, that's fine. So if you want the seller to pay for it, then you say it's contingent upon the seller having the property inspected at their expense by a pest control operator selected by the buyer, if you want the seller to pay for it. But what I see most commonly is either buyer and buyer or seller and seller, but that'd be up to your buyer to decide.
Most buyers don't mind paying bond. When they're.
Most buyers don't, yeah. And then the next block is you're gonna have this to the closing attorney or to the other agent no earlier than 30 calendar days prior to closing and no later than blank calendar days. And this is calendar days, not business days here. And typically I see 10 to 15 days put in there. You don't want to get it too close to closing because you want to know what has to be done and get it done before closing. But these letters are only good for 30 days. So that's why it's no earlier than 30 days before closing.
And you suggest 10?
I say 10, right. Now, this next sentence is extremely impossible. Right after that blank, it says, if the, it's extremely important. If the buyer is responsible for having the property inspected as indicated above, but does not have the property timely inspected for the report's required delivery time frame, the buyer waives any and all rights under the terms of this section. So if you have your buyer doing this, you better be paying attention to the dates in here and get it done within that time frame, because your buyer has waived their right to any inspection if you miss it. And that's a lot of weight on your shoulder. A lot of our agents don't even realize that verbiage is in there. So I like to put it out so you know it's there. And then it goes on to say all the things that the seller has to fix if it's wrong. But then after that, in that next paragraph, go on down, about halfway, says if the seller does not make the repairs and treatment, the buyer shall have the option to either accept the property, negotiate, or terminate the contract, getting the earnest money back. So it says the seller will do all these things, but then it gives the seller an out. If the seller does not want to do them, then they can decide. But now, if the seller says he's going to fix everything, the buyer has to buy it. This is the reason why people like to include that in the due diligence, because the buyer may not want to buy it if it had severe damage, even though it gets fixed. Is that clear as mud?
Where are you? There's lost.
I'm at number 11, halfway down that second paragraph.
So in the due diligence period, you're suggesting the sale of 100 is done during the due diligence period, even though it might be 30 days prior.
And you
that's
messed
the
with your
reason
number.
why.
Right.
But how do you make sure that your buyer can get out of it if the sale 100 is not to their liking? Because this is saying that
This way you can't,
this way you can't.
unless you include it in the due diligence.
But the due diligence just, okay, so in the due diligence you would say, during the due diligence period, we're going to get the sale 100 done, and if we don't like it, we don't have to say you don't like it.
You
because
don't have
due
to like it,
diligence is-
just terminate.
Understood.
You don't have to tell the sellers why you're terminating.
Okay.
They don't have to know. You decide maybe you didn't like the color of the paint, you decide you terminate. Okay, and the next one, the survey, title, exam, insurance, it's just that we recommend, highly recommend, that everybody get a new survey. And attorneys will say, oh, well, we have a survey, the seller has a survey. They need to get a new survey. You want to go on record telling your buyers to get a new survey. And you need to go on record telling your buyers they need title and owner's title insurance. And that's another whole class in itself. And for you newbies, y'all been watching the videos, and there's a good video on the site about the title insurance, which is very important. Wouldn't be a bad idea if you had some buyers that were talking about not getting the owner's title, have them watch the video. I have lots of horror stories about title insurance, people not getting the owner's title insurance, and we won't go into that today, but they need owner's title insurance. And survival, this next thing just simply says that if there's some things in this contract that need to be performed after closing, that they will survive the closing. And a good example of that, we had recently, somebody was getting ready to close on a house, and the seller had agreed to replace the I think it was 5 windows, couldn't get them done by closing. That survived the closing. They did it after the closing. Home warranty. If the house is in good shape, hopefully you will have a Global Home USA warranty going in here. But the important part is I have agents here that will, if they can't get the buyer or the seller to buy a warranty, they buy the warranty themselves. It is so important to have a warranty on the house. It relieves a lot of anxiety from you and the buyers. You know, the buyers get in there and hot water heater breaks after 2 days or 3 days or something, and they're going to call and blame you. Why? You didn't tell me that was blah, 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 blah. You know, home warranty is a great thing. And as I said, I have agents that if she can't get the buyer or seller to pay it, she buys it herself. She thinks it's that important to put it on there. But typically, you can get the buyer or seller to pay for it. But the way you fill out this paragraph, if, assuming you're going to have a warranty, you go in here, it says parties agree that a home warranty ordered by the buyer normally, because the buyer is normally the one's going to order it. Sometimes, maybe if the listing already has one on it, the seller may be doing it, with at least 12 months, and I see some people put the agent's name down there. That's not the intent. With at least 12 months of coverage after closing date, will or will not be provided by closing, and blank dollars, so you should know how much money the plan costs. $400, $500, $600, somewhere along in there. And it will be paid by whom? Either the buyer or the seller, one or the other, will go in there. To the home warranty company. Buyer to pay any deficit and surplus reverts to the payer. Your proposed home warranty company and type of home warranty, and you put that there. If the house is in really good shape, hopefully it's Global Home USA. And then you put the plan down, whether it's a gold plan, platinum plan, whatever the plan is, go ahead and write that plan, that word down there also, in addition to Global Home. If the air conditioning is 15 or 20 years old, don't put a Global Home on it. Because more than likely you're going to have to replace the air conditioning during the year. And you own Global Home USA. So it'd be a big expense out of your warranty company.
How about Peru? How about Peru?
That's a different topic.
If it's how old?
I'm sorry?
You said if it's how old?
I just said 15 or 20-year-old air conditioning. Sometimes you get them that are old and rusted, and you know they're not going to last. You don't want to put a Global Home in there. The next one about fire or casualty injury, you can certainly read that. If something happens to the house, a hurricane hits or whatever, it talks about what happens there. Number 16, either you are or are not going to get a seller's disclosure. Pretty simple. 99% of the time, there will be a property disclosure in MLS for the property. Certain properties are exempt, and there's a sheet that spells all the exempt properties out, but not very much is exempt. So you need to have, now every now and then, somebody's buying an old rundown house or something, and they're going to demolish it or, you know, almost completely redo it, and they don't care, so you can put in here not to get one, if that's the case, but it's not going to be, that would be very rare. Your lead-based paint, saying in here that that it's built before 78, it may contain lead hazards, and that they agree to sign a disclosure of lead-based paint. And there's a separate form for that. And the next one, number 18, Megan law crime. The important thing I'll tell you about this, guys, is do not go on record telling somebody whether somebody is a sex offender or not. You may think you know that somebody down the street is a sex offender, but you don't really know, unless the person has told you themselves. And just don't get in. If your buyers are concerned about that, they're to call the sheriff's office and find out for themselves. Don't say you said. They find out for themselves. That's very important. The trust account on that block, it will be may not. I don't care what you check actually, because the company does not. If we hold an earnest money, we don't have interest-bearing accounts, so might as well just check may not. All right, moving on. The rest of this I need you to read on your own. Then moving on down to number 28, which is the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7. What goes in that blank there? You're going to, if you're representing the buyer, you're using a due diligence addendum. You will write in there the due diligence addendum is attached. And if you have the contingency on selling a house, you would attach that addendum. Any addendums that you have that you are attaching, you will address them in this spot and say that they are attached. Any other, if they got a house to sell, you would have the contingency addendum, any other addendums you have. You do not put the agency agreement in there. I had some people put the buyer agreement there. You do not do that. The buyer agreement's nobody's business but ours. You don't give that to another agent. All right, moving on down to number 31, expiration of the offer. Give them as short a length of time as possible. If you're representing the buyer, you don't want the seller to get your contract and shop it. And by shopping it, I mean they wait to see if somebody else comes up with a better offer. You want them to respond to your contract, so give them a short length of time. They don't need any more than a day. And a lot of times, I don't give them a day. When I was writing contracts, I give them as little as 2 hours. You got to know the situation. If you got a seller, you know that seller's out of the country, then that's different. But typically, a day is plenty of time. And the next little part is that I have not seen a single contract that has that filled in on it. And there are some that should have had it filled in. What it says, in witness whereof, the last sentence, if the signee is not a party, appropriate legal documents, power of attorney, corporate authorization, are attached or to be delivered within the blank business days. I've seen a lot of contracts that are LLCs or corporations, and somebody signed. How do you know they have the authority to sign? How does the listing agent know they have the authority to sign? If you represent that buyer, then you need to attach the document that says they have the authority to sign. If you have a listing and a buyer's agent brings you a contract like that, you need to ask for the document saying that they have the authority to sign.
I don't understand, I missed something there. How do you know if they have authority to sign or not?
You don't unless you see the paperwork.
So anytime you get a contract, you want...
Oh, no, if it's a
a
corporation.
name other than...
If it's something other than the name that's
Other
signed.
than the name on it, okay.
Sometimes a trust, okay, a state, the state is the own seller, a trust is a seller, and then corporations, LLCs, you need to know they have rights.
As far as a witness goes, I just came across this recently. Who can be a witness? I mean, can you witness each other's? Can a wife witness their husband?
No. And I'm glad you brought that up. On the witness, even though it's here, I've talked to 10 to 15 attorneys, and they all say it's not required. It's better if you have a witness, but you don't have to have a witness. The worst thing you can do is if you send a contract up to New York or New Jersey, and the seller sign it, or buyer sign it, send it back to you, and then you witness, and you do not actually see them sign it. Don't ever do that, because you could get yourself in trouble. If you don't actually see somebody signing, do not say you witnessed it. So it just won't have a witness. If they don't have somebody there that can witness, but husband is not legitimately allowed to witness for the buyer or vice versa.
But the key there is witness is not mandatory, it's just a good thing if you can.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we should be signing it if we're...
If you're there with them, then you sign as a witness, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And if there's someplace else and they have a neighbor that can witness, that's great. But I wouldn't put them to a lot of trouble to go down the street to find somebody, you know?
I don't know what situation would come up, but could you witness both the buyer or the seller?
Yes.
And I mean, it doesn't matter who you're witnessing,
If-
as long as you see it signed.
Exactly.
There's no legal obligation if we witness it. All we're saying is that we saw that person sign it.
Exactly. That's true. And so if you see the buyer and the seller sign it, then you witness for both of them, the buyer and the seller. And this notice address, that is for the buyer and the seller, and I've only seen, I think, one contract that had that filled in. Most people do not want to give their buyer's information to the other agent, and vice versa, so they don't fill that
So
in.
you don't fill this in at all? So you put the
NA?
No, I
You
didn't.
put NA, or, yeah.
You put NA?
On the notice address, you put NA. Because if you represent the buyer, the notice address should be your address, because you are representing them, you have a buyer agreement with them. They're your client, so you are them, basically. That's the way the agents are looking at it. The next page is briefly on the next page. The next page is important. A lot of agents do not think it is. The escrow part at the top. I'll caution you, just because the contract says it's $1,000 and agent owner is holding it, If you don't have that $1,000, do not sign here. If you see the check and you have it in your hand and you're gonna deliver it to the admin people, then yes, you sign it. You sign it. You don't have to wait for the broker to sign it. You as the agent sign it as long as you have the check in hand. But where agents get in trouble is they just sign it because they think it's coming. And then I can tell you horror stories about that too. When it don't come, the agent has to fork it up. So you don't sign that unless you have it. But if you, if this office is keeping it, and you have the check, then this would be your information at the top. AgentOwned Realty and with your name and contact information up there. The next section, you either, if you represent the buyer and your client, then you would check the buyer's agent box. And I'll tell you right now, my license number is 17815. You need a South Carolina license number if you're in this office. You need your brokers, but in this office, I am 17815. And my license expires June 30th, 2014. And yes, I've already, no, but y'all can all change that. It expires June 30th, 2016. I just renewed it.
Oh, you renewed it?
2016 is now my expiration.
17815?
17815.
What'd you say about it? You expire June of
30th,
2016? June the 30th.
And Mama is spelled M-A-M-A?
Mama is M-A-M-A, but over here you put Liz.
Because I didn't realize that Isle of Palms has a different number than 1832.
It does.
Well, we found that out when we were putting in a solar.
Yeah, Isle of Palms is a different number. I'm the broker in charge officially of that office, but it's a different MLS number.
But it's not 1832.
No. And I don't know what it is, I cannot remember that one. And the next one, if you're representing the seller. Now, if you are representing both the buyer and the seller, then you're a dual agent, and you would check the dual agent box on those. Or if you are a designated agent, you check the designated agent box. The other thing that, I wanted not run over an hour, and I'm sorry about that, but it's kind of hard to go through this contract in less than an hour. Now, I just want to tell you the other contract I put on your desk, and that for the people out there, is the condo. Oh, this is not the condo one. But they changed this condo contract. They like changing contracts at the state level. And saying that, if you get an offer on one of your listings and it is written on an old contract form, not the most recent one that we just went over, excuse me, your E&O insurance says that to be covered, you will use a state-approved form. That old contract is not the state-approved form anymore. The new one we just went over is the state-approved form. Now, this condo one is the state-approved form also. But what we're seeing is some of the people, I even had somebody the other day bring in a contract that must have been 5 years old. I mean, it's been changed 4 times since then. The danger, if there's nothing to change on it, then you say, oh, what do I do? I mean, everything's perfect on this. The seller likes everything. What do I do? I'd be good alone and gamble. Nothing's a problem until it's a problem. But if should you get in trouble with that, then you may not be covered on E&O. So I'm just letting y'all know. You might want to suggest to the, if there's anything to be changed, you rewrite the contract on the right form. Now this condo,
That wouldn't even be a contract,
it's a contract. I mean, builders have their own contract, so. And see, that's another thing people bring up. The builder's contracts are not state-approved forms, so we get into that issue anyway. But on this condo contract, remember I said when we were talking about the finance that people like the minimum and maximum of the loan amount? Well, this has that on there. And Byron King in Columbia has said that if you don't like the contract we just went over, you can use the condo contract. It was revised in March of 2014. So it's just been revised, and they have good verbiage in there, and there's only one spot in it, 2 words in the whole thing that has to do with condo. Everything else is just regular residential. So if you like this contract better, use it all day long. If the finance part is better for you, the other major thing I want to point out to you is on page 2, under earnest money, and this is major. Look at that big bold, under earnest money, big bold paragraph.
Yeah.
Read on down through that and get down to the, let's see, where. Okay, unless otherwise agreed upon, y'all see that? Right, third sentence down,
Page down, I'm sorry.
page 2, on earnest money, condo contract. In the big bold, so the third sentence down, it says, unless otherwise agreed upon, y'all see that, everybody?
Mhm.
In writing, the parties agree that the escrow agent shall disperse the earnest money to the buyer, unless the seller's attorney has filed a lawsuit to determine distribution of the earnest money within 30 business days of the closing date. This is new. It is brand spanking new. They are testing the waters with this contract and this verbiage. A lot of people like it, a lot of people don't like it. But it certainly takes the burden off of the broker in making a decision about the earnest money. So it says if the seller has not filed suit, then the earnest money, within 30 days after proposed closing, earnest money goes back to the buyer. So if you use this contract, you better make sure you understand and your buyer understands what it says.
But the other one doesn't have that.
No, it does not.
Hmm.
As I said, they're testing the water with this new
Are
contract.
we under obligation to explain the difference to our clients?
If you use this,
Even if we don't give the
No.
option to which one to use? See what I'm saying?
well, you could, but
We won't get in trouble if we don't, I
no,
guess.
you will not. Right. And I don't see any reason to use this one really myself, but, there's some people that hung up on that minimum and maximum and that kind of stuff, and there's a few slight changes in it, but that's a major change right
If
there.
it's a condo, do you have to use this one, or can you still use this one?
There's only verbiage in there is to do with a regime. There's 2 words in there about a regime. So you should use that, I guess, but you could use either one of them really, because there's only 2 words in there to deal with the condo. And the one we just went over has verbiage in there about any regime fees, transaction fees, those kind of things, and who they'd be charged to. Any other questions?
Any of the blanks that require money that doesn't have room for words, is that a problem? Like earnest money, there's room for numbers, but really no words.
There's not room for words, and I hate that, because again, the same issue could happen there. But it is not room for words there. Good question. Any other question? Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Lisa.